So we're going to look at digital out-of-home advertising. Digital screens aren't new, and we've seen a huge amount of the out-of-home market move their spend to digital screens. But we're now starting to see emergence of the next stage of digital out-of-home, new ways of verifying, new ways of measuring, data-enabled targeting, and deeper location information. So we're going to give you a really good overview of the whole sector today. About a year ago, the IAB set up a digital out-of-home task force. We were getting more and more of our members, particularly on the sort of ad tech side and the agency side, who were starting to do more, particularly in the programmatic digital out-of-home space, and wanting to not only understand but educate the market, get some clarity around terminology, and just ways that we can help the industry grow and operate in an effective and an efficient manner. So you can see there's a huge range of companies there and a lot of experts that have been feeding into the work that's come out of that task force. The first project that we ran out of that task force, which is a really obvious one, was trying to get some clarity around terminology and standardizing that a little bit. So a glossary of terms came out, so some really good definitions there. Again, I'll share a link for that, but really good starting point to understand the different phrases that might be used. Some of them are phrases, you know, that may not be familiar to out-of-home people, and vice versa. A lot of digital people, there may be terminology there that could be useful understanding the out-of-home sector. So hopefully that's useful. We'll send a link. That link's got all the IAB glossaries, so I think there's 5 or 6 there for other areas as well that might be useful. Late last year, the IAB and PwC, with the kind support of Broadsign, ran some research on programmatic digital out-of-home in the US, Canada, UK and Australia. I'll share a link to the whole study, but one of the, I guess, the most importance in this developing sector was identifying opportunities, areas that need focus, things that we can do to move the industry forward. And I won't read them all out there, but you can see the difference in market. And the task force will be particularly focusing on those 3 areas, working with the industry, working with, you know, bodies like the OMA and MOVE to make sure that we're all aligned and we have really solid ways of showing advertisers what the digital out-of-home and programmatic digital out-of-home market can do for their brands. So I will share that. So we're going to kick off. As I said, we've got 2 wonderful guides for you. So Joe definitely knows digital as well as out-of-home, but really deep knowledge in the out-of-home area, and can be your translator, particularly for the digital people who may not be used to the out-of-home area. And we've got Trisia from MediaMath, who is a programmatic wizard, who can guide through the differences, particularly the differences in how programmatic digital out-of-home can work a little bit differently, a few extra steps, a few things to consider for people who might be used to standard programmatic, I guess that's a thing, but other areas of programmatic. So I'll hand it over to you guys. Audience, please shoot through questions and we'll get to them at the end. Thanks, guys.
So thanks everybody. Thanks for coming today and listening to us talking all about programmatic digital out of home. What an exciting space it is to be in. I guess what we want to talk about is the starting of the process is the same across the board, and Trish, you've probably got a bit of a perspective on this.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's a lot that programmatic buyers can learn from the experience of out-of-home buyers, those who have bought traditional as well as digital. And I think a lot of the processes you'll see across the presentation are very similar. So in terms of where to start, I find the best place to start is having a collaborative conversation with your tech partners, whether that's demand side or supply side, ideally both, just around your objectives and your constraints. We find it's really important for buyers just to take ownership over their strategy and their outcomes. In the end, this campaign is for you, and rely sort of on the expertise of the technology partners to make those objectives a reality there. So these 5 points are what I would start talking about with a buyer that wants to execute out of home programmatically. And they're all pretty self-explanatory, but the key thing to consider is whether these objectives or constraints that you have, whether they're flexible or whether they're fixed. A large part of the value of programmatic is the ability to iterate and change during the flight. So that's a really important consideration just to have early on. The fifth one around cross-media activity is really taking advantage of some of the opportunities that programmatic brings. So programmatic can make it easier to intertwine different aspects of your media plan, whether that's audio, native, display, catch-up TV, any of those, and just make them work cohesively. I think as users and as humans, we know that our perception of a brand is shaped by all media we see, so we intuitively know that, and programmatic can help us to just have more control over that process.
So over to how to buy direct. That is how it is bought currently in the traditional way. So there's a number of steps that we go through in terms of the briefing process right to when it gets up on the screen and verified, etc. So I'm going to walk you through what the traditional buyer currently does in terms of booking digital out of home. In fact, all out of home. It doesn't really vary hugely from whether it's a static billboard or a digital billboard, but I will focus this part of it on the digital aspect of it. So the first thing we will decide is what kind of format we're buying. So it's kind of predetermined up front whether it's going to be a large format buy or a retail buy, or we're going to target office towers. We know when we're talking to the media exactly what format we want to brief them on. And that might be determined by the strategist. It might be determined by, if it's a retail message, then we want to be in a retail environment. So there are a number of different pieces that get plugged in to understand what is the format that's going to best deliver our message in the market. We also brief them on the active weeks. So do we want to be active for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks? Whatever our time in market, it's critical that we let the media owner know what that period looks like. And then we go down to markets. What markets do we want to be in? Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth? Is it metro? Is it regional? It's really critical that we spell out what markets we need to be active in. And sometimes we'll even look at different budget splits per market. So we want to upweight heavier towards Sydney, Melbourne, downweight Adelaide and Perth. But we're very specific in terms of we need coverage in these specific areas. Then we look into the target audience. Now, this might be the marketing target audience. So it might be made up of, we want to target frequent flyers, we want to target lapsed users, but we will always bring that target audience back to a demographic. So the demographic might be people 18 to 54. And these demographics are very similar to those demographics that are found in other traditional mediums like television and radio. We also may brief on this point whether it's going to be 100% digital or a combination of digital and static. So before digital really started to get scale, we would have mostly static with a bit of digital sprinkled in. But now we have more digital inventory available. It's not unusual to see 100% digital brief in market. So if we want to have digital, then we will put that in the brief, because we might be wanting to change messages midway. We might not have creative ready in time, because if you're doing static, you need to build in that printing time and then the posting period, and then it gets up. So static inventory in general, there's more of a lag time between the creative's ready, then you've got to go into the printing and the posting periods. That can take up to a week sometimes, depending on the complexity of what you're printing and the install process of that large format. So you literally have to get people, and there's a whole group of companies that are called installers, and they talk to the media owners, and then they go and install your printed panel. Then we also brief them on a dollar amount. So we're talking, here you go, you've got $300,000, please come back to me with a response based on that amount of money. Or we may say, I've got $300,000, please come back to me with 2 options. It might be a 60% option and maybe it's a 40% option. They will reply with proposals based on those 2 options. or 3 options, or whatever the options that we might want to consider look like are. Then we go to our objectives. What are we really trying to achieve in outdoor? Is it to build brand awareness? Is it about local hyper-targeting? So if we're doing a local area marketing campaign, we might supply postcodes. Are we like trying to build brand affinity? Whatever overarching the marketing objectives are, we would build those into our overarching brief. Then the media response. This is where it gets fun. We look at their responses, which primarily is based on a PowerPoint presentation. And as you can see there, I have got a site card. This would be contained in the deck. So what they're doing is showing us, here are the sites we're offering you. Here's what it looks like. And usually the site cards are the best they will ever look. It's at night time often because it's nice and lit up. It's showing me where the location of it is, whether it's digital, if it's in a high traffic area, and there'll be a map at the back to show me the pinpoint of actually where that site is located. We will analyse that with the proposal, which is an Excel document that comes across and have each of the sites detailed, and the share of voice and the duration of the exposure and the cost will be detailed in that proposal. We will run that proposal through Move, which is our audience measurement system, and look at the CPM that that proposal is delivering based on that target audience that we've selected. So we've got a bunch of sites, it's in Move, and we run it against the target audience, which might be people 18 to 54. And we look at that reach and that CPM based on that individual proposal. We might then look to combine that proposal with another media analyst proposal and look at the overall CPM that both proposals are delivering. We'll also look at the cost per minute, so the amount of time that my ad is on screen and the total amount it is costing me. And it's an evaluation that's critical because each individual screen can have different durations. So some of them are 45 seconders, some of them are 30 seconders, some of them are 10 seconders. So we need to look at what the cost per minute of the overall schedule is and individual sites are in order to establish whether it's a good proposal or not. We'll then negotiate it. We'll ask for more sites. We'll ask for more value. We'll look at the effective discount, although that's not necessarily a great negotiation lever because market rates are not published. They can change all the time. So a discount, generally speaking, is quite inflated. So the moment for large format, the discounts can be anywhere between 85 to 90%. So it kind of really doesn't have a huge amount of weight in terms of negotiating and understanding whether that proposal is any good or not. Once we've agreed on the proposal, we'll ask them to fill out the IO, which is pretty much detailing every single piece of information about that site. Now that's not across the industry and it's not standardized, it's quite a new element. We're asking the media owners to supply us with the share of voice, the number of minutes, the number of plays, the duration of the single exposure of every single site that we're buying into. And primarily that's used for verification, which I know that Mo's going to talk about it a little bit later, but we kind of need that information to confirm that we are comfortable with what we're buying, and it provides the base position in terms of measurement. Did we get what we paid for in the beginning? Then we'll book it, and we pretty much go to the media owner, please book it, and then we'll load it into our financial system and charge the client. Once it's up and running, we'll go and verify the campaign. So that pretty much is a snapshot of the process. In terms of timing, it can take 2 days, 2 weeks. Some of the people will do a longer term negotiations, and those ones can be generally drawn out when you're looking for other elements to be included. But generally speaking, if I booked something now, I could be up tomorrow or up next week, depending on what I was trying to achieve in that negotiation. And then we go to how to buy programmatic.
Yes. So programmatic can be bought through main ways. So the first main way is the private marketplace arrangement. I would say this is the most common. Here you don't get any guaranteed inventory and there's no obligation to buy, but importantly, you do know what you're buying. Throughout the deal ID that is crafted, you'll have specific supply and specific CPMs there. So you do have that knowledge of what you're getting. It's really good if you want to be able to optimize and iterate throughout the campaign flight, which, as we've discussed, is one of the benefits of programmatic. However, if you're very confident you know what you're booking, it could be a very specific campaign. You may want to consider a programmatic guaranteed deal. So here, it's very similar to the IO process that Joe described. You're getting a set amount for a set price or within a set period. So the benefit of executing programmatically here would be if you want to centralize your buys, so buy all channels within the same platform or DSP, or if you just want to take ownership of your data and have that in real time through the logs. First look arrangements are much more nascent. I haven't really seen any done in Australia, but they're sort of a combination of both. It means if you really, really know you want certain inventory, you have the ability to purchase it before other buyers in the market, but you don't have the obligation to. That comes with a premium, but for the right campaign, it's definitely worth talking about with your supply and demand technology partners. So within programmatic, you're purchasing on a fixed or floor CPM. While you can measure sort of the minutes or other metrics, these aren't how programmatic is bought. And all transactions require the supply partners generate that deal ID. So you will still have that contact with the supply partners at this stage. So it's not sort of a blind buy on the DSP, you're having that continuous contact and collaboration with the supply partners.
It's really interesting. I think, Tricia, two of the biggest things I see as differences there are the ability to pause in programmatic versus in a direct buy, you are buying it for that set period, and to cancel it is pretty much non-cancelable. Out of home is the medium that you can't cancel unless you've got a really dire situation. So with COVID, we were faced with having asking the media owners to cancel activity, which was something that in the past we would never been able to do, but given the circumstances, they allowed us to do it. So that is probably one of the biggest differences, I'd say, in programmatic out-of-home buying versus traditional buying.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely come to the forefront with COVID-19. So we were running programmatic campaigns programmatic out-of-home campaigns that we did translate into other channels, and that took place over a number of hours, and it was fairly simple. But as you said, there are arrangements for direct buyers as well. I think the industry is very conscious of relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And the second part of programmatic versus traditional buying, I had somebody ask me the other day, can I buy a 5-seconder in out-of-home programmatically? I said, no, you can't, because you can only buy the way they're selling it, essentially. So if that duration loop is that you've got a 10-second ad, you can only buy a 10-second ad. You can't go and buy your 5-seconders or your 3-seconders. You can really only buy how it's being sold. That's a big difference. So then we go to play versus impression. Now, this is a big one for, in the beginning, people to get their heads around, and talking to the programmatic people. It's like, well, it's impression, therefore it equals one person. Well, no, not at all. In out-of-home, it is known as the one-to-many medium. Every ad is hitting more than one person. So one play equals many, many impressions. And I know that John's going to talk about the measurement system a little bit later, but it really is a bit more of a challenging way to understand how to buy out of home programmatically versus in the traditional sense. So impressions are multiple numbers in programmatic out of home versus the traditional programmatic one-to-one that programmatic buyers would normally see.
Yeah, as a programmatic buyer, one thing I'd really recommend is reading the glossaries that the IAB puts out. So the IAB Australia one is great. When I first started in programmatic out of home, I read the US one, and it's just really good to have the terminology right, because everyone's been in those meetings where you don't know what this term is, you write it down, you Google it later, but yeah, it's just easier if everyone's on the same page and there's no shame in just aligning the language of speaking early on.
Yeah, absolutely. So the programmatic transaction cycle.
Yes. So here you see a number of different bubbles. So those sort of in the white are the different technologies involved in the process. So starting from the top left-hand side, you have the demand-side platform, we call this a DSP, communicating with a supply side platform or SSP. So these two are connected through what's called a deal ID, which is just a token of numbers and letters that says this inventory from this SSP or seller is for this buyer in this demand side platform. So when this deal ID is established, then the two technologies communicate through a series of bid requests that come from the supply side platform and bid responses that come through the demand side platform. This can be seen as like a negotiation, and if both sides agree that the impression is to be solved, then that's, I guess, an option one. Then we proceed to the ad server or the content management system. So the industry loves acronyms, so they call this a CMS, which is one of the things I had to Google when I first started working with out of home. And what they do is they function pretty much like a publisher ad server. They have rules set up about which creatives or which verticals can go on which screens, frequency, just restrictions, as well as have a creative cache on their end. So they control the playlist, which you'll see on the top right-hand side, which shows there are 8 slots in this case in this loop. That programmatic impression is going to be on that 8th slot of that loop, and then it shows on the billboard there. So you also see a number of dotted lines outside the transaction cycle. This is all about how the creatives are delivered. So we have a more focused diagram on this later, but it's important to note that the transaction cycle, so DSP to SSP to CMS, it's all about sort of recording and measurement and the transaction of money. The creative does sort of work in its own loop. So how it differs from normal programmatic. So Gai alluded to this earlier, but in 2020, there's no such thing as normal programmatic. We're seeing more and more channels become programmatically executed. So anything from podcasts to native. So as we go through this, you'll sort of see exceptions to the other programmatic channels column. But there are a few things that just for programmatic buyers, it's important to be aware of. So the first is real-time bidding. So this is really the cornerstone of programmatic and particularly programmatic display. So when you win an auction, you can expect your ad to show on the page within sort of milliseconds. In out of home, there's about a 1 minute delay between when you win the auction and when the ad renders. This isn't standardized between different supply side partners and different media owners. It can be between 15 seconds and 5 minutes. So this can be seen as a disadvantage, of course. Being more real time is better. But when you think about it, there's a lot of other programmatic channels like podcasts, like mobile app gaming, like long form video that function in kind of similar ways. So I would ask buyers, is that real time something that's really needed for this campaign, or will that 5 minutes make a difference? If we move on to ad stitching, sorry. A lot of the questions I get as a demand side platform are, how are the ads bought? So in most programmatic channels, it started off with a very strict waterfall where direct buys would be prioritized, and then at the very end of the waterfall, programmatic. And now we've seen header bidding come in where programmatic buyers largely have the same access. I would say digital out of home, there are 2 main ways that it's currently bought. The first is a direct API integration where all spots within that loop, so from the previous diagram, all 8 of those spots on that billboard have the ability to potentially buy. The other option is that there's a dedicated spot available to programmatic buyers. So 1 of 8 or 1 of 6. And currently there is a waterfall in place, so direct buyers are being prioritized. The advice to buyers here is out of home has much more of a fixed supply. There's not going to be sort of a rush in traffic as you can see with other channels, or there'll be much more inventory available. So in the planning stage, it's important to look at your parameters and just make sure you have enough supply within what you're targeting to reach your objectives. In terms of creatives, this is the biggest difference I saw from other programmatic channels. So there's a huge range of creative files that are needed for out of home. So in terms of dimensions, if you look at the aspect ratio, there are different shapes of billboards. And within those, there's different sizes within that same aspect ratio. Once you start talking to supply owners, you'll also find that even if a billboard is static, it may require a static image on a video rather than a static sort of image file. So it's important to really have that conversation and not make assumptions. In terms of rotation, as we saw, there are different spots within a loop for out of home. So these loops, these spots, as Joe mentioned, can be of different lengths. And from some conversations I've had, the lengths of spots can also change. So just because you've developed a 6-second, let's say, video file that you want to run in out of home, that doesn't sort of show how much time you will get in practice. Bidding and impressions. So following on from the other slide, when you win an auction in the DSP, you will likely see more than one impression come out of it. And that is just a reflection of the users that had an opportunity to be reached by that ad. You may also see it very rarely lower than 1. So the impression multiplier is always larger or equal to 0, but it can be 0.5, for instance. And then measurement, I'll just touch on very briefly since John will be going over it in a further slide. But if you want to track and optimize progress towards online and offline events, that's very possible. There's just a few extra steps involved compared to a standard programmatic.
Thanks, Trish. So there's really some key things to consider where you want to buy traditional out-of-home or programmatically, out-of-home programmatically. Do you want the flexibility that programmatic offers versus the kind of always-on strategy, and that is a spot in every loop in every week that you're buying, and that is how it's sold at the moment, and that is how it is purchased. And that's probably the biggest consideration you need to understand, that whether what you're trying to achieve, which methodology is going to best achieve that for you. So what to buy, and as Trish mentioned, there are many, many different formats within out of home, and they're all different sizes. There's no, in roadside, there's no standard size format. Retail's a little bit more standard, as is street furniture. Now, street furniture, I'm essentially talking about a bus stop. We've got railway stations, petrol stations, so they're those ads that are on the sides where you're filling up the petrol station at the pump TV there. Many gyms, office tower media, so they're the ads when you get into a lift. And then medical waiting rooms, and there's more on the way. So pretty much wherever they can put a digital screen in, where there's obviously going to be an audience, you will see an out-of-home digital ad being built, because that is where they can make money, and that's where they can capture an audience, and where we can target for our clients and the best places possible. So day parting and targeting and flighting, Tricia.
Yeah. So part of the value of programmatic is just having that control and being able to, on the fly, decide what you want to target. So all the controls you're used to having a DSP around which days you want to serve on, which time of day, whether you want weekends or weekdays, as well as flight dates are available. So you can set a particular budget, a particular creative, particular screens for a set of dates, and then extend that or cut that short, overlap that with another flight. You sort of have all that control in there. So a few things to consider are that creative personalization of flighting. So this is the most common reason I see for someone wanting to really set multiple flight dates, is if you have a sale or if you have different company strategy for this time period versus that time period, setting up programmatically can be just really easy to control. And that's the same with budget as well. The thing to consider really is a trap that I've seen buyers, myself included, fall into, is just really assume that targeting times with the highest peak traffic is the best outcome, that you will see more efficiency from that. So if your DSP supports the impression multiplier, you're bidding for a user. So using that move data, how many users they estimate will have an opportunity to see it. So that's already factored into your price. So I wouldn't focus too much on trying to get into the most high traffic areas, unless that is part of your strategy. From a cost efficiency perspective, that's all baked into the CPM that you're bidding on. From a technical
sorry, Alicia.
No, you go.
I was going to say, for traditional buying for out of home, you can still day part in terms of your messaging. So if you want to have a message for the morning, you tell the media owner to play this creative in the morning, and they can change it mid-morning, change it in the afternoon, and that's the beauty of digital anyway. We're seeing more and more advertisers take advantage of that flexibility for creative for out of home, which is great. We are seeing a little bit of people buying only sort of back end of the week, for example, but primarily media owners wanting us to buy the whole week, because if everyone decides to buy the back end of the week or whatever end of the week, they still need to manage and optimize their loop. They don't want to have a situation where they've got the back end of the loop or the site filled, and when the front end hasn't been sold, and somebody may not want to buy the front end of the week. So therefore they've got a lot of unsold inventory. So primarily we're seeing most of the loops sold in the traditional way, but there are definitely examples where advertisers are putting in a Wednesday to Friday strategy for traditional out-of-home buying.
Yeah, I find when you have those sort of buttons all in the DSP, it can be like really tempting just to push them. But I think what I want to focus on this slide around targeting are sort of these three options that we have, and they are very powerful. So within location, this is passed from bid request. You can go down to latitude and longitude. You can measure location from sort of a fixed point of interest, could be a retail store. Audience concentration. So looking at your first party, second party, and third party data sources, and scoring your screens according to audience concentration. So importantly, this isn't like remarketing or audience targeting where you're serving to those exact users. You're looking at all the screens you have available all the times of day and just seeing where you have highest probability of reaching that target user. And then you have the external data sources. So this is where you take a external piece of information. So it could be a set of sports scores if you're promoting a team or sportswear. It could be live traffic reports, and you buy based on that. So these are all tactics that I've seen used well, but the trap can come in if you decide to sort of layer them all on, or go too granular in each of them. And this happens in other programmatic channels as well, and it can just both limit your reach and limit your pacing and cause all sorts of stress, as well as not really give you much room to optimize or change mid-flight if you're already very granular. So the value of programmatic sort of diminishes from that aspect in those. I would say like the main takeaway is just because you can doesn't mean you should. You can layer all these in, but talking to your out-of-home team that have bought traditional is a really good step just to make sure what you're thinking of in terms of targeting does make a lot of sense.
So just quickly on creative, because I know we are probably going a little bit over, Trish, because there's so much to talk about in the upfront programmatic versus traditional. Creative, we talked about motion, non-motion. Essentially the headline there is you cannot run motion on roadside. There is a strong belief that moving images on roadsides cause accidents. So the government has said no moving images on the side of the road. Internal though, retail, gyms, you can run motion video. We talked about the range of assets, the deadlines. The thing that you need to be very much aware of is you have a gambling ad, an alcohol ad, or new junk food ad, you cannot have that ad within 150 metres of a school. Now, those will be pre-programmed into the DSP, so you're not going to break that rule. Traditional out-of-home buyers need to be mindful and work with the media owners to make sure that we're not breaking that rule, because we will get into a lot of trouble if we do.
Yeah, definitely agree with that one.
And my creative flow is much simpler. The creative agency essentially receives the specs, they create the ads, and there may be very different versions of the ad because of the different sizes. It goes to the media owner. The media owner schedules the creative, and the ad appears on the screen as booked, hopefully.
Great, so moving on to the programmatic flow. This looks a lot more complicated, but I promise you it is not that much more complex. Key thing to note here is with the deadlines that you have for direct, I would not necessarily shorten the cycle of programmatic because the approval process is the same. So the creatives assets have to go to the media owner for approval. There's no expediting for programmatic purposes, no automation. It still sort of needs to be approved at this stage. So the creatives are entered into the DSP either as files uploaded directly or using a third-party ad server just to allow you to track it from an independent source. So the primary purpose of uploading them in this way is just to make sure that you have that reporting and measurement within the DSP and the third-party ad server. The creatives themselves, they go to the media owner and supply-side partner who traffic them in the CMS, and they're cached on that end. So throughout the bid response, the creative isn't actually transported through that. It's just sort of for tracking purposes that call happens. The creative flow occurs outside of it, and that's just to maintain user experience.
The key thing there is the creative approval, and very quickly, nothing can appear on a screen that the media owner hasn't viewed and approved. And that's due to a contractual agreement with the landlord. They cannot show anything in the outdoor environment that could be considered offensive. It will hurt their contract with their landlord or the media owner asset, and put that in jeopardy. So every single piece of creative must be viewed by the media owner before it gets onto the screen.
And that is definitely the case for programmatic as well. So I would encourage all buyers to have that written approval before launching. So now we'll kick off to Mo, who's going to talk about verification.
Hey guys, Joe and Tricia, thank you for that. That was really wonderful. I know we're running low on time, so I'll try to keep mine quick. If we look at verification and why verification is important, really for any digital media, verification and transparency is a key part of it really going to the next level and growing. We've seen huge growth in digital out of home because of the digitization of assets. The next natural step of that was really to start verifying and tracking those assets. And then obviously the next step to that is programmatic. And we see with out of home becoming more and more digital, the aim is really to grow spend in digital out of home. There are some key things that are important to verification. The first one is independence. So really the type of verification that is happening should be independent of the tech that it's tech or media owner that it's verifying. That means it's collecting its own data. So it's not data from any other source other than being collected independently also. And then and no relationship with the media owners and so forth. Now, if you do have that independent tracking, what that will mean is there'll be transparency. And I think transparency is a key thing here. What are we looking for when we're looking for transparency? It's really, you know, did you get what you booked and paid for? And with that transparency, there will be an increase in confidence and trust in the medium. And I think, you know, every medium at the moment is seeking, you know, transparency in order to build that trust and confidence further. And what we see verification, the role of verification playing really in out of home is to help it continue to grow as we've seen over the past few years. Now, if we can go to the next slide. There are a few verification types currently in market. The first one is physical inspections. That has been around for quite a while now. And what they do is go out and check the screens in person. So people go out and check the screens. It's been happening for years and years now. which is great. They do pick up numerous things, like whether the screen is got a good line of sight and so forth, or if there's any damage to the screen. So that's one type of verification. The next type is proof of play reports or aggregators. So proof of play reports from media owners, or aggregating media owner data to put into a dashboard. Now that came next and really was, helping out of home become more digital and have those reports there, which is great. And then the last but not least is smart creative tags, or tags that are attached to the creatives. Now that is what Veridooh does, and we'll talk about a little bit about that later as well. Now, really, the aim of verification is to confirm to every media agency and advertiser that they're getting what they book. So, as Joe mentioned, the type of things that media agencies are booking right now are number of panels, right? And if we really simplify it, you're expecting a panel per week. You could buy a day part, and we can check that as well. But let's just assume it's a panel per week at the moment. You're also wanting a particular location in most instances, and we're finding that agencies and advertisers are becoming more and more specific about locations, even if they are doing a broadcast buy. They want to know what their locations are. They want to know what the locations are prior to the campaign going live as well. Secondly, you're booking an ad length. Now, this is a really important one because on particular screens, as Joe mentioned, you could be booking a 7-second ad length. On another particular screen, you could be booking a 10-second ad length. And on another screen, you could be booking a 45-second ad length. Now, it's important to know, obviously, the ad length that you're booking, because you'll be creating a creative to suit that as well. Also, you'll be booking a share of time or share of voice. We call it share of time just to remove any ambiguity that is related to share of voice. And last but not least, you're booking a particular creative. So you're saying this creative on this panel at this location with a 10-second ad length, 1 in 6 share of time, running in even rotation over the full week. So I think, when we talk about the booking process for both programmatic and for direct or traditional, it's really important to understand what you're booking prior to going live. And I think that becomes the baseline, the benchmark of whether your campaign was successful. So the moment you have that, it's ingested into a platform so a comparison can be done. Now, what should be tracked and verified, and what are we tracking and verifying? Really, right, what we're trying to do is a booked versus delivered. What did you book and what was delivered? And it works both ways, for both programmatic and for direct. Firstly, we're checking, did you get the number of panels that you wanted? And in out-of-home, traditionally in out-of-home, people are booking a panel per week. And we know with digital out-of-home now that, there are time, day, location targeting that can happen. And really ensuring that if you booked one panel for that week, did you get that panel for the week? Secondly, location is really important. If we go back to see what Tricia and Joe were talking about, you have the ability to target here at locations. So if you booked a panel in Martin Place, did you get your ad played on that in Martin Place? Now, if we refer back to the metrics that I talked about in the previous slide, all of those metrics can be crunched to figure out the number of plays that you should be receiving. I think right now, out of home is talking about plays. Are people being guaranteed plays? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But really, it's a great way to start to look at out of home and how it's being delivered. Next, you should be tracking your ad length. Once again, 10-second ad length. Are you getting that 10-second ad length similar to online? There's this concept of reaching completion. Has your ad reached completion, and really checking that? Anecdotally, what we're seeing in out of home, your ad reaches completion every single time, pretty much close to every single time, which is great. Another metric is exposure time, and we've found a lot of interest from agencies and advertisers about exposure time. It's really a great way to start to compare apples with apples across all formats. As the guys mentioned earlier, across all formats, you could have your ad running in numerous ways. And so a play on a street furniture or on a retail panel may not be the same, or correctly is not the same as a play on a digital billboard. There are differences in both. So really exposure time starts to become interesting as a great next step to sort of look at, you know, how much time your ad is being spent on a screen. That's another way you can compare to online as well. Now there are some issues with that because of the one play not equaling an impression with out of home. So in out of home, as Joe mentioned, one play could equal more than one impression. We're looking at things like share of time as well, and creatives. So if we break it down really quickly here about creatives, you're expecting creative A on panel B between Monday and Wednesday, between 9 a.m. and midday. You know, if you've booked your campaign like that, then we can check that. If the wrong creative is being played, then we can verify that as well. I've gone through that really quickly just because I'm conscious of time. So if there are any questions, just shoot them through and I'll try to answer them. But we can also look at this data in a number of different ways. We can look at it day by day. We give a whole bunch of post-campaign reports as well to really inform agencies to help buy better in the future as well. So it's not a purely just a tracking, but you can get more insights into that. Now, if we just go to the next slide, I've got a quick example of the type of view that you can see. This snapshot that I've got here of the dashboard is an example showing some results. As you can see here, we're looking at panels compared to what was booked. We're looking at both a total panel perspective and a delivered booked panel. So two numbers there trying to differentiate between total and really the targeted panels. And we look at that for plays and exposure time and ad length accuracy and share of time. Now, there is a whole lot more that can go into verification, but really verification, we see it as really a cornerstone of creating that transparency and trust to really allow out of home to grow further, just like in any other medium. I think that's good for me. Joe, I'd like to introduce John McNerney from Verizon, and I'll pass that on to him.
Thanks, Mo. Excellent. The fun topic of measurement, but important one at that in 5 minutes. I'll do my best. So measurement has a few different meanings for digital out of home, and they all rely on different various types of data signals, and they often used together. So this is from location, audience, or even delivery log data. So if we look at those purposes and compare them to what we're used to in the digital space or programmatic space, we want to know when an ad is delivered on a particular screen and seen by a user. And in the digital out-of-home space, this is inherently quite challenging because of the way that people are walking around and being able to know that they've actually seen the ad. The second one is around audience data, allowing personalization and targeting. And in digital out of home, this brings new types of data sets and models, and matching against these to understand those audience is quite challenging as well. But the third around the omni-channel measurement and attribution piece, and this isn't always a simple translation into digital. They are quite different. So I'm gonna, if you just go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about how these are approached. So Joe was mentioning about the impression before, and this is what's really important for digital out of home. Put simply, this is what determines the number of people behind a screen at any given time. So for this one-to-many medium, we have what's called the impression multiplier. This is where buying platforms or DSPs can read provider data coming from media owners or SSPs to estimate what the number of people are behind that given screen at that given time. So the impression multiplier is what calculates the cost of the impression, known as the CPM. And this is what is paid for that given play on the screen. So this is a calculation of the X number of people multiplied by the set price of that screen during that specific day, that week, or the month. But there are actually different standards for measurement globally. And this is true for traditional non-digital, which is static, or digital out of home. In Australia, we have Move, and the OMA have recently announced that this is going through an iteration of being able to ingest digital signals, so it can be more relevant for the programmatic outer space. New Zealand actually doesn't even have a standard of audience measurements. In the US, they use, for outdoor, they have GeoPath, and indoor Nielsen. If you think about the people that are standing at the door in retail outlets, clicking those clickers, that's essentially that kind of panel data. And in the UK, they have Root as well. So if we go to the next slide, we then go on to the next point about measurement for digital out of home, and this is specifically around attribution. So if we look at understanding about brand awareness and performance that out of home brings them, we look at the bottom layer there, which is the brand lift studies that can be garnered from delivering programmatically. And this is really facilitated by either the meter owner or the buy-side platform and their proprietary data, coupled with the third-party measurement data as well. And this is really to understand the campaign and the campaign's effect on increasing the brand sentiment. We've also then got in-store and on-site, so taking measurement studies that really show us what determines determining the people that have actually been exposed to a billboard and seen that, and being able to ingest what is quite the constant signal is the mobile or the device ID, and being able to remarket them onto the website or bring them into the store. And then you've got footfall, so taking non-exposed people and scoring that against points of interest, interest audiences, and understanding the footfall lift to installs at different types of venues. And this data can be matched in the buying platform to understand movement providers, which give proximity targeting and things like that around points of interest. So the last one at the top funnel there is sales lift. And this is really measuring the ROI, or the effect the digital out-of-home campaign has for those exposed users on sales, often matched with brands using buying technologies, first-party data to whether it be CRM data or whatever first-party data they have that determines if that out-of-home campaign has driven some form of lift. So if we go to the next slide, thanks. This really just ties it all together with regards to attribution and audience targeting and what third-party measurement means. So if you look on the left-hand side, you've got the data from the screens themselves. That's ingested into the buying platform or the DSP. And this is matched against the location or movement data, as well as the attribution, whether it be points of interest, data signals, to provide the ability to do these types of reports and measurement studies, but also, which is what Tricia and Joe were talking about before, is the holy grail of programmatic. Because it's now ingested in the buying platform, this is where the platforms have the ability to do some segmentation about those audiences, understand more with insights to be able to target and personalize creative, not only on digital billboards again, but across different screens, whether it's catch-up TV, audio, or even desktop. So this is really how it all ties together in the programmatic sense, using measurement data. So that was as fast as I could potentially do measurement in the space of 5 minutes. I'm going to hand it over to Harry and Alicia. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I think we have less than 5 minutes, so I will try to summarize our part. So please, we can go to the next slide. Hi, so we have put together, through our researchers with our clients, a quick snapshot on life after lockdown. And yes, we see the light at the end of the tunnel. Next slide, please. So Blis is a location technology business. We understand audiences through location lenses. We use our technology to gather audiences and look from insights, consumer insights, activation, and attribution. We have a local team in Australia and New Zealand, but we are headquartered in the UK. So our technology is very robust in location accuracy. And throughout this time, through COVID, we have worked together with our clients to understand how COVID-19 has impacted consumer behavior. And we have this quick snapshot on what are the changes we are seeing now that lockdown has started to release. So I let Harry to showcase these findings. Next slide, please.
Cool, thank you, Alicia. So what we've been doing is we've been tracking footfall across a wide variety of locations over this period. So cafes, restaurants, all manner of retail, parks and beaches. And what you're looking at here is just how volatile, just how drastically footfall has changed over the past 3 months. It's not normally crazy. So each month had a theme. March was peak demand, peak panic buying, peak toilet paper buying as well. Obviously in April, we hit a wall, right, during lockdown. But as restrictions begin to be eased in May, something really interesting is happening. So across most retail areas, yes, we are seeing an uptick in footfall. But the locations like restaurants, like cafes, like parks and beaches, that are actually showing the biggest increase. So basically areas where you go to have fun, you know, interact with people for recreation. And for advertisers, it says a few things, right? So firstly, and rather importantly, people are beginning to emerge from their homes. It's happening at different speeds, but it is happening. But more important than that, actually actively seeking some sort of normality again. If you think about Maslow pyramid of needs, right? People spend about a month focused on survival, focused on safety. Well, consumers appear to be moving a bit beyond that now. They're seeking more psychological comforts. They need to be around people for fun, for enjoyment. So this has massive implications, you know, not only on where and who you target, which out of home is perfect for, right? Targeting the areas where, you know, people are actually going right now, but also the tone and the language you use in your messaging as well. I think the time for the we're here for you, you know, we know things are tough. I think the time for that is probably done. It also hints at how recovery might move at different speeds, which we explore in the next slide. Cool. So Australia appears to be bouncing back slowly, but this recovery is actually not evenly distributed in every part of Australia, right? So what we're seeing is that it's happening at different speeds in different places for different people and different interests. And it really pays to know where. So what this map is looking at is how footfall into car dealerships has changed in April. Obviously this is Sydney, compared to pre-COVID February. So everything's red, you know, massive decline everywhere. But what you'll see is in post-lockdown May, in the next slide, is that, yes, the market is still down, but recovery is actually happening in very distinct, very select areas. It is actually happening. So you can see areas like, you know, the eastern suburbs, the northern suburbs from Mosman all the way through to Hornsby. So if you know your Sydney geography, you probably recognise this as a very affluent, you know, skew to what you're seeing here. But when you look at the map for, say, for instance, the people who are currently going to restaurants or going back to the beach or going to shopping districts, this map looks very, very different, right? And it really pays to know where these hotspots are appearing because they're happening in different spots depending on the audience and the category. And this is perfect, again, for out of home, right? Especially when you combine it with up-to-date granular location data. So you're able to identify the pockets of demand that are happening everywhere. You know, there's corridors of activity where, you know, people are starting to wake up and efficiently target them. Especially important in this current climate where, you know, advertisers are looking bang for bang for their buck. Next slide, please. And then we look at behaviour, right? This has changed dramatically as well. So there's a lot going on in this slide, but basically what we're seeing is that while, yes, people are slowly increasing their activity outside, they're actually also spending significantly less time when they're at these locations than they did prior to COVID. So you can imagine if you spent maybe an hour at a cafe prior to COVID, now you're maybe spending 40 minutes or 30 minutes. So on the macro level, people have become a lot more direct in their public interactions, a lot more brief, right? A lot less patient. And this obviously has implications for brands, right? So, you know, as attention spans decrease, getting that placement, getting that audience, that location correct has become as important as ever. Creative also needs to play a role as well. I mean, I don't think any brand seeks to make non-impactful creative, but it's really, really important now to be more direct, more purposeful, more striking to get people's attention. And then finally, on the next slide, cool. So it's also had a massive impact on how brand choices are made. So in a very short period of time, it appears COVID-19 is conditioning people to be more open about their brand choices. So what you're looking at here is an example of loyalty in the supermarket category over the past 4 months. It's a week-by-week look. And we see similar things in other categories as well. But you know, pre-COVID, loyalty for most categories was quite consistent. Right. In supermarkets, it was consistently low. And then, you know, in the next slide, you'll see, you know, COVID happened. And when people were faced with scarcity and shortages, they were forced to be disloyal. They were forced to go to new brands and forced to try new options. And then in the next slide, you'll see that, you know, when lockdown happened, people were retreated back into their local area. But then finally, in the next slide, you'll see that as we move into some post-lockdown sort of phase, people are actually not returning to their old behaviours. And it remains to be seen how permanent this is. But we're seeing that people are actually still returning to those brands that they tried earlier on at the height of COVID, right? And you'll see the next slide that this is happening across every category. So we're seeing it in QSRs, we're seeing it in department stores. And the question is that we're trying to answer is, you know, how permanent is this? You know, if consumers are more and more open to trying new brands as they are now, if this persists, you know, what does it mean for brands and how does it change strategy? If it persists that, you know, it seems like consumers are going to be more promiscuous in the future, how does that switch up where and how you target? To explore some of these things, I'll pass it on to Alicia and the next slide, and she'll talk about some of these implications for digital out of home.
Yeah, thank you, Harry. So what now? And what are the opportunities for digital out of home? So through this phase of COVID, lockdown releasing, Australians' mindset is changing, is evolving. Different messages should be embraced, and digital out of home give us that flexibility as a buyer. Go where the action is. Throughout the presentation, Trisia, Joe, John have mentioned how important, and Mo as well, how important location is. Target those corridors where the demand is growing faster. Focus on the day parts and location areas where your demand is. So think about your category and your brand and capitalize that. Then get to the point. Right now, consumer attention has decreased. So digital out of home message has to be direct, succinct, and more impactful than ever. And finally, we are seeing through our research that consumers are open to try new brands. So capitalizing that consumer openness, promote more now to win market share. So with a proposal creative in the right location, maximize your digital out of home investments. So thank you so much. Those were the thoughts that it came from our research. And I let Gai continue. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. That was amazing.